Hey there, Bible nerds. Welcome to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. Alright, so for this episode, we will be doing audio only. If you are watching on YouTube, it's just gonna be audio. I am unfortunately having some technical difficulties. So you've joined me for episode 10, our final episode in the Genesis series. What a journey it's been through this very remarkable book of beginnings. In our previous episode, we witnessed Joseph's dramatic rise from prisoner to prime minister, his brother's journey to Egypt, and their emotional reconciliation. Today, we're wrapping up the book of Genesis with chapters 46 through 50, where we'll see Jacob's migration to Egypt, his prophetic blessings over his sons, Joseph's continued faithfulness through the end of his life, and how God's covenant promises are preserved even as this foundational era comes to a close. This episode brings our Genesis journey to a satisfying conclusion while setting the stage for our next series on Exodus. So find your spot, grab your drink, and let's dive into these final chapters of Genesis together. All right, chapter 46, Israel's family moves to Egypt. So after receiving the astonishing news that Joseph is alive and ruling in Egypt, Jacob, who was now often called by his divine name Israel or Yisrael, sets out with all his possessions toward Egypt. But before leaving the promised land, he stops at Beersheba, a place with deep family connections where both Abraham and Isaac had built altars and offers sacrifices to God. That night, God speaks to Jacob in a vision. Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replies. I am God, the God of your father. And the voice continues. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So this divine reassurance addresses what must have been a major concern for Jacob. Is leaving the promised land the right thing to do? So God affirms that this migration is part of his plan, not a detour from it. The promise to bring you back will be fulfilled not in Jacob's lifetime, but through his descendants in the Exodus. The touching detail about Joseph closing Jacob's eyes refers to the ancient practice of a son closing his father's eyes after death. So God is promising Jacob that he will live out his days with his beloved son. The text, the Bible, then the text from the Bible then provides a detailed registry of Jacob's family members who went to Egypt, a total of 70 people. This census-like list might seem tedious to modern readers, but it serves an important purpose, documenting the small beginning of what would become a great nation during their sojourn or during their stay in Egypt. As they near Egypt, Jacob sends Judah ahead to get directions to Goshen, the region where Joseph has arranged for them to settle. When Joseph hears they have arrived, he prepares his chariot and hurries to Goshen to meet his father. The reunion is profoundly emotional. I can only imagine, as a parent, can only imagine how Jacob, must have felt like, like to see his son, whom he thought was dead for more than 2 decades, and his favorite son at that. Can only imagine all those emotions, feelings, everything. He's probably feeling everything. and it was probably very overwhelming, you know. So when they finally saw each other, Joseph throws his arms around his father and weeps for a long time. Joseph says to Israel, or now I'm confusing myself. Joseph and Israel are one person. Okay, so I'm just gonna call him Joseph from this um onwards. Because it's confusing and a lot of people are not even really familiar about Jacob being renamed as Israel. So Jacob. So Jacob says to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph then instructs his family about their upcoming introduction to Pharaoh, saying, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him that my brothers and my father's household who were living in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own." And then he continues with this strategic advice, saying, "When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you should answer, 'Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did.' Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds and for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." Apparently, they look down on shepherds. Like the Egyptians look down on shepherds. It's like I don't know, but yeah. So this last detail reveals Joseph's diplomatic savvy by emphasizing their shepherd identity and settling them in Goshen. He ensures they'll remain somewhat separate from Egyptian society, because like Egyptians look down on shepherds, so they will just leave them alone pretty much. So and they can preserve their culture because they are being left alone as well. So that was, you know, one of the things, or one of the reasons why Joseph wanted to do that. So like I said, this whole thing is gonna help preserve their distinct cultural and also their religious, of course, their religious identity while under Pharaoh's protection at the same time. So this chapter beautifully illustrates how God works through ordinary human decisions to accomplish his greater purposes. Jacob's migration to Egypt might have seemed like abandoning the promised land, but God reassures him it's actually the path to becoming a great nation. The detailed family list reminds us that God's grand historical plans are worked out through specific individuals and families. Joseph's emotional reunion with his father represents the healing of the family's deepest wound, while his careful instructions about meeting Pharaoh show how divine purposes often require human wisdom and planning. Sometimes what looks like a detour in our lives is actually God's direct route to fulfilling his promises in unexpected ways. Um, Fun fact corner. The number 70, the size of Jacob's family entering Egypt, held symbolic significance in ancient Near Eastern cultures, often representing completeness or perfection. Interestingly, when this genealogy appears in the Greek Septuagint translation, the number is 75, actually, which is the figure quoted in Stephen's speech in Acts 4, verse 14, the book of Acts, chapter 7, actually, I'm sorry, chapter 7, verse 14. So the difference comes from the Septuagint's inclusion of some additional descendants of Joseph. Either way, the small number emphasizes how dramatically the Israelites would multiply during their time in Egypt. From a few dozen, like 7 dozens, to over 600,000 men by the time of the Exodus. All right, and that is it for chapter 46. All right, chapter 47. So, settling settling in Goshen and Egypt's economic transformation. Joseph follows through on his plan, presenting five of his brothers to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asks about their occupation, they respond as Joseph coached them. Your servants are shepherds, just as our fathers were. They explain that they've come to Egypt because the famine is severe in Canaan and request permission to settle in Goshen. Pharaoh speaks to Joseph. Your father and your brothers have come to me, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen, and if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Then Joseph brings his father Jacob in to meet Pharaoh. It's a remarkable scene. The aged patriarch standing before the mighty ruler of Egypt. Jacob blesses Pharaoh, and an act that subtly reminds us of the Abrahamic covenant, where God promised that Abraham's descendants would be a blessing to all nations. When Pharaoh asks Jacob his age, he replies, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." Jacob then blesses Pharaoh again before leaving his presence. Um, so, so yeah, after that, Joseph settles his father and brothers in the best part of Egypt in the region of Ramses, another name for the Goshen area, and provides them with food according to the number of their children. The narrative then shifts to describe how Joseph manages Egypt during the remaining years of famine. The situation becomes increasingly desperate. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. Joseph collects all the money in Egypt and Canaan in exchange for grain, bringing it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money runs out, the Egyptians come to Joseph saying, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is all gone." So Joseph replies, "Bring your livestock. I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they bring their livestock, and Joseph gives them food in exchange for their horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. I wonder if they had chickens there. This is the first time that I'm like being curious about that. Did they have chickens and ducks, poultry? I'm gonna have to do some research on that. When that year ends, they return saying, "We cannot hide from our or from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph buys all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sell their fields because the famine is too severe, and the land becomes the Pharaoh's. So Joseph reduces the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he does not buy the land of the priests because they receive a regular allotment from Pharaoh and have food from that allotment. Boy, it must have been so nice to be a priest during that time. You don't need to worry about not having food and all that. They were just spoiled, these priests, during that time, given money and food, and wow. Anyway, so Joseph then tells the people, "Now that I have brought you and your land today for the Pharaoh, here is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other four-fifths you may keep as seed for the fields as soon as food for yourselves and your households and your children." The people respond very gratefully. They say, "You have saved our lives. May we find favor in your eyes, of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph establishes a decree still in effect in Egypt at the time Genesis was written, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. Only the land of the priest is exempt. Meanwhile, the Israelites settle in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquire property there and are fruitful and increase greatly in number. Jacob lives in Egypt 17 years, reaching the age of 147. So as his death approaches, he calls for Joseph and makes him swear not to bury him in Egypt. When I rest with my fathers, carry me out to Egypt and bury me where they are buried. Joseph promises, I will do as you say. And swear to me, Jacob insists. And Joseph swears to him. Then Jacob worships as he leans on the top of his staff. Now, this chapter reveals Joseph's extraordinary administrative abilities while raising some intriguing ethical questions. His economical policies consolidate power for Pharaoh whilst saving countless lives during the famine. The Egyptians themselves acknowledge, you have saved our lives even as they enter a form of servitude. Is Joseph creating an oppressive system or implementing the best possible solution in a desperate situation? The text in the Bible doesn't really explicitly judge these actions, but it's worth noting that the centralized Egyptian state that Joseph helps create will eventually become the system that oppresses his own descendants. There is a certain historical irony here. Joseph's success in Egypt plants the seed for both his family's prosperity and their eventual bondage. Meanwhile, Jacob's insistence on burial in Canaan shows his continued faith in God's promises about the land, even after 17 comfortable years in Egypt. All right, fun fact corner. The 20% tax rate that Joseph establishes in Egypt was actually quite moderate by ancient standards. Some ancient civilizations imposed tax rates of up to 50% or more on agricultural produce alone. So Joseph's system allowed farmers to keep 80% of their harvest while ensuring the government had reserves for future crises. So this taxation system apparently continued for generations and was considered fair enough to be remembered positively by the time Genesis was written. Archaeologically, or archaeological evidence confirms that ancient Egypt had sophisticated systems for grain collection and storage, with extensive records kept by scribes who carefully documented agricultural production. Oh, and that's it for chapter 47. Alright, chapter 48. Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. So sometime later, Joseph is told that his father is ill. He takes his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to visit Jacob. When Jacob is told that Joseph has arrived, he rallies his strength and sits up in bed to see his, favorite long-lost son, who is, now found. Jacob recounts to Joseph how God Almighty appeared to him at Luz in Bethel in Canaan and blessed him, saying, I will make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Then Jacob makes a surprising declaration. Now then, your two sons born to you in Egypt, before I came to you here, will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. This is effectively an adoption. Yeah, very much an adoption, kind of. Just by, I guess, I would say just by paper, but it wasn't really by paper, just by word, but just legally, But of course, Joseph is still gonna be with his two sons. So Jacob is elevating Joseph's sons to the status of his own direct sons, which will give Joseph a double portion of the inheritance through his two sons. And that's probably going to be triple because, he will get his own inheritance and then plus his two sons. So that's triple, really. So Jacob adds, any children born to you after them will be yours, in the territory they inherit. They will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. Then Jacob mentions Rachel's death on the way to Ephrath in or Bethlehem, a sad memory that connects this blessing of Rachel's grandsons to his enduring love for their grandmother. So when Jacob notices Joseph's sons, he asks, "Who are these?" And he says, "They are my sons God has given me here." Then Jacob says, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." Now Israel or Jacob's I keep switching back and forth. Jacob. Now Jacob's eyes were failing because of old age and he could barely see. Joseph brings his sons close to his father, who kisses and embraces them, saying to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." So Joseph removes his sons from Jacob's knees and bows down with his face to the ground. Then he positions them before Jacob, with Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand and Manasseh on his left toward Jacob's right hand. But Jacob reaches out his right hand and puts it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he puts his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blesses Joseph, saying, "May the God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and by the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth." So, when Joseph sees his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he is displeased and takes hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh, saying, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." So, if you know, you know the thing about the younger sons in the previous generations. But his father refuses, saying, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." So that day Jacob blesses them, saying, "In your name will Israel, or in your name will Jacob or Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So he puts Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Jacob says to Joseph, "I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow." So this chapter continues the recurring Genesis theme. The reversal of birth order in God's plan, just as Jacob was chosen over Esau and Joseph was elevated above his older brothers. Now Ephraim is blessed above Manasseh. Jacob crossed arms during the blessing, create a powerful visual symbol of this divine pattern of choosing the unexpected. Joseph's objection shows how deeply ingrained the cultural expectation of primogeniture was. Even Joseph, who himself benefited from being chosen over his older brothers, initially resists his father's blessing of the younger son over the firstborn. Jacob's adoption of Joseph's sons also has profound implication for Israel's future tribal structure. Instead of Joseph forming one tribe, his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, will each head their own tribe, giving Joseph a double portion of the inheritance, the traditional right of firstborn that Reuben forfeited through his misconduct, if you remember. Hey, fun fact corner. Jacob's mention of one more ridge of land or portion or mountain slope, depending on the translation, given to Joseph refers to Shechem, which became a significant city in Israel history. Though Genesis doesn't record Jacob conquering this area militarily, in the book of Joshua 24, verse 32, mentions that Joseph's bones were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver. The area around Shechem became part of Ephraim's tribal territory and later housed the tabernacle at Shiloh. During the divided monarchy period, it served as the first capital of the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam the first. That is it for chapter 14 or 48. Alright, chapter 49, Jacob's prophetic blessings. Jacob calls all his sons together for his final words to them, a mixture of blessing, prophecy, and in some cases rebuke. I'll start with those. These poetic utterances offer glimpses into the future tribal characteristics and destinies of Israel. So he begins with Reuben, his firstborn. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel. For you went up unto your father's bed, unto my couch, and defiled it. This refers to Reuben sleeping with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine, an act of, that really cost him his birthright privileges. Next, he addresses Simeon and Levi together. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they please. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. This clearly references their violent revenge against Shechem in chapter 42. Jacob's prophecy about scattering them would be fulfilled when Levi received no tribal territory, and Simeon's territory was eventually absorbed into Judah's. Speaking of Judah, Jacob offers one of the most significant prophecies. Judah is the one who had, one of the best transformation, actually, and I'm so happy to have seen him grow into the person that he had become, considering how he treated Joseph. It was all his idea to begin with, and then the whole thing, with his daughter-in-law. But so Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub. Judah, you return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. This prophecy establishes Judah's preeminence and contains a messianic prediction about a future ruler from Judah's line who will receive the obedience of the nation. I will give you a little bit of spoiler on that in a little bit. Jacob continues with briefer statements about his other sons. Like Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for the ships. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel, but will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. Asher will have rich food, and he will provide delicacies fit for the king. And Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. For Joseph, Jacob offers an extended blessing filled with an imagery of abundance and divine favor. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attack him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arms stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who help you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep spring below, blessing of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessing of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Finally, for Benjamin, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey. In the evening he divides the plunder. So after blessing each son, Jacob instructs him, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Sarah. The field and the cave in it were brought from the Hittites. When Jacob finishes giving instructions to his sons, he draws his feet up into the bed, breathes his last, and is gathered to his people. Now, Jacob's final blessings reveal how actions have consequences that extend through generations. Reuben, Simeon, and Levi all face diminished futures because of their past sins, while Judah and Joseph receive the most prominent blessing. The prophecy of Judah is particularly significant. Listen to this. Establishing his tribe as the royal line from which King David and ultimately Jesus would come. The poetic language Jacob uses is rich with agricultural, geographical, and animal imagery that would resonate with the tribal characteristics and territories his descendants would eventually inhabit. His insistence on burial in Canaan alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah demonstrates his enduring faith in God's promises about the land even as he dies in Egypt. He's looking forward to the fulfillment of God's covenant. All right, fun fact corner. The phrase gathered to his people used to describe Jacob's death appears frequently in Genesis as a euphemism for death. I suggest more than just physical death, it implies reunion with ancestors in some form of afterlife, revealing an early Hebrew understanding that death wasn't the end of existence. So, the detailed instructions about burial location also reflects ancient Near Eastern beliefs about the importance of proper burial. The cave of Machpelah in Hebron remains one of Judaism's holiest sites today, with a structure built over it dating back in Herodian times, around the 1st century BC, demonstrating the enduring significance of these patriarchal burial traditions. That was that was a lot. Alright, chapter 50, burial, fears, and final promises. So Joseph falls on his father's face, weeps over him, and kisses him. Then he directs the physicians in his service to embalm his father. This is a distinctly Egyptian practice that would have been unusual for Hebrews. The embalming process takes 40 days, and the Egyptians mourn for Jacob 70 days. When the mourning period ends, Joseph speaks to Pharaoh's household. If I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father, then I will return. Pharaoh responds, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear to do. So Joseph goes up to bury his father, accompanied by all Pharaoh's officials, the dignitaries of his court, and all the dignitaries of Egypt, as well as all the members of Joseph's household, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children and flocks and herds are left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also go up with him. So yeah, it is a very, very large company. When they reach the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they lament loudly and bitterly, and Joseph observes the 70 well, no, actually, 7 day period of mourning for his father. The Canaanites witnessed this elaborate mourning ritual and remarked, the Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony in mourning. That's why the place is called Abel Mizraim, which means mourning of the Egyptians. Jacob's sons carry out the instructions, bringing him to Canaan and burying him in the cave in the field of Machpelah, which Abraham had purchased as burial site. After the burial, Joseph and the entire entourage returned to Egypt. Um, Now that their father is dead, Joseph's brothers become weird again. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God as your father. So when their message comes to Joseph, he weeps. His brothers then come and throws themselves down before him, saying, we are your slaves. But Joseph reassures them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. The saving of many lives. Yeah, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he speaks kindly to them, reassuring them. Joseph remains in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lives to see the third generation of Ephraim's children, and the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, are placed at birth on Joseph's knees, a gesture indicating his formal recognition of them as his descendants. As his own death approaches, Joseph says to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph makes the Israelites swear on oath, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph dies at the age of 110. They embalm him and place him in the coffin in Egypt. This final chapter beautifully resolves the major themes of Genesis while pointing forward to Exodus. Joseph's statement, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, encapsulates a central theological message of Genesis. God's sovereignty works through and despite human failures to accomplish his purposes. The brothers' fear after Jacob's death reveals how guilt can linger even after forgiveness has been extended. Joseph's response show his spiritual maturity and deep understanding of divine providence. His final request about these bones demonstrates the same faith we saw in Jacob. Though he lived his adult life as an Egyptian official, his heart remained connected to God's promises about Canaan. In the book of Hebrews 11, verse 22, specifically mentions this request as an example of Joseph's faith. So his coffin in Egypt stands as both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of Genesis and the patriarchal era, but also a symbol pointing toward the exodus and return of the promised land that would come centuries later. Fun fact corner. So Joseph's age at 110 years was considered the ideal lifespan in Egypt in ancient Egyptian culture. Several Egyptian texts mention living to 110 as the perfect life. That Joseph reached his symbolically perfect age would have signified divine favor to both Hebrew and Egyptian audiences. And with that, we've completed our journey through the book of Genesis, from creation to the flood, the Abraham's call to Joseph's coffin in Egypt. We've witnessed God's faithfulness through every generation. Genesis has shown us how God works through flawed individuals and complicated family dynamics to accomplish his purposes. We've seen the establishment of the covenant with Abraham, its continuation through Isaac and Jacob, and how divine providence preserve this chosen family, even though famine, displacement, and even through famine, displacement, and most especially family conflict. So, as we close the book of Genesis, we're left with Joseph's coffin in Egypt, a powerful symbol that points forward to the Exodus story. The small family of 70 people who entered Egypt will multiply into a great nation, but they'll also experience oppression under a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. God's promise to bring them back to Canaan awaits fulfillment. Joseph's bones preserved in Egypt represent both the end of the patriarchal era and the seed of the hope for the future redemption. So, I am so excited to announce that our next series will explore the book of Exodus. I've been hinting it, but yeah. So, we'll witness God's dramatic deliverance of his people from Egyptian bondage, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, and the establishment of the tabernacle. We'll see how the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob begin their national fulfillment as Israel becomes God's covenant people. The themes of redemption, divine presence, and covenant faithfulness that we've seen in Genesis will expand in powerful new ways. So, thank you so much for joining me for this final episode of the Genesis series. I hope you've been enriched by these ancient stories that reveal so much about human nature and the divine faithfulness, plus the drama. If you've enjoyed this exploration, please consider sharing it with someone who might be encouraged by these accounts of God working through the imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will. Join me next time as we begin our journey through Exodus. And until then, this is Kaye signing off. And as always, stay curious.